Which camera do I look at? Which one? That one. Cool. Okay.
According to some estimates, we cannot track $2.3 trillion in transactions.
Nazi war that took place on our planet. And to get into this subject, let's talk a little bit about what the Navy spies were bringing back during World War II, the Navy spies that were embedded in German secret space programs, and what they were bringing back to tell William Tompkins and what William Tompkins was figuring out. And some of the things they were telling him was that Germany was obtaining very advanced technology in their secret societies. And during World War II, these groups were taking down their research and their equipment to Antarctica, and that there were non-terrestrial groups assisting the Nazis and the German secret societies with these endeavors. So let's now talk about how Germany was obtaining the technology in the early 1900s. And there was a few ways they did this. They did this through the work of one Victor Schauberger, who we'll discuss next. They used the channeling techniques of Maria Orsic and her Vril Society, and then they also engaged in agreements and various technology exchanges with nefarious reptilian beings. So let's discuss Victor Schauberger. Victor Schauberger was born into an Austrian foresting family in the late 1800s, and on long expeditions into the forest, Schauberger became fascinated with streams and actually found that flowing water, and actually vortexing water specifically, builds more energy than man is able to measure. And then Schauberger then proved his theories by designing floating canals that were able to float huge timber logs with very little water, using an ingenious water exchange stations that would essentially replace the warm, worn water with cool, structured water that had very interesting properties to it. Now, Schauberger turned his research from tapping the energy of water with implosion rather than getting energy from explosive means that we're unfortunately still using today, almost 100 years later than Victor Schauberger was researching implosive technologies. And he built both energy creation and what was termed as liquid vortex propulsion mechanisms with this research of implosion rather than explosion. And you can see here in this picture, it's Victor Schauberger with a model of a domestic power turbine that he called the Trout turbine. And what's very interesting is that he called it the Trout turbine because during his studies of flowing water, one of the things that fascinated Victor Schauberger, and that's still very perplexing, is that he would notice how salmon and fish were able to swim up waterfalls. And somehow they were able to use the power, the vortexing power of this water to swim up very large distances and almost counter gravity by doing so. And it was because of the vortexing nature of the water. And the Nazis then caught wind of his work into energy creation devices and these propulsion mechanisms. Another device of his was called the repulsine. And when the Nazis caught wind of his work, they essentially forced him to develop his research for them in the late 1930s and until the Germans had to flee Europe in the mid-1940s. So Victor Schauberger was essentially forced to work for the Nazis and develop these ideas of implosion and very advanced propulsion systems and energy creation systems out. And not only Victor Schauberger, but we have the work of one Maria Orsic and her Vril Society. So Maria Orsic was a psychic medium born also in Austria, and she was the leader of a German secret society known as the Vril. And she followed the German nationalist movement and moved to München, Germany in 1919. Now, while she was there, she was in contact with another German secret society called the Tool Society. And she broke off from the Tool Society with a group of other young mediums to start her Vril Society. She wanted to start this society for more peaceful means than what was going on in the other secret societies that were there in Germany. And together, these girls channeled extraterrestrials who were giving her telepathic messages, and they stated that they were from the Aldebaran solar system, which is approximately 68 light years away in the constellation of Taurus. And from 1919 on into World War II, these extraterrestrials continued their telepathic messages to the Vril Society and assisted them in technologically advancing themselves into a spacefaring civilization. But when the Nazi SS caught wind of this, they tried to take too much control of the projects that were going on in this Vril Society, and Maria Orsic and her Vril cohorts did not like that. They were channeling these telepathic messages, channeling this information because they wanted it to be used specifically for exploration and peaceful means. But of course, the Nazi SS wanted to take their technology, take their research, use it for more nefarious and warlike purposes. And then in 1945, Maria Orsic and the members of her Vril Society mysteriously vanished. So they did not want the Nazi SS to take control of what they were doing, and they mysteriously vanished. Some people theorize that they in fact took one of their saucer craft and escaped the planet, and there's a lot of other theories of where they went to, but they escaped the Nazi SS regime. And then of course we have the Nazi agreements with nefarious reptilian beings. And William Tompkins had revealed that the German secret societies entered into pacts with these nefarious reptilian extraterrestrials. And the pacts involved the technological assistance to the Germans in exchange for the Germans teaming up with the reptilians to not only conquer this planet, but go on galactic conquest missions. And the Nazi groups reportedly obtained anti-gravity craft, beam weapons, and extended life technology as hand-me-downs. Now, the reptilians didn't give them their most advanced technology they had, but they gave them enough technology that was to advance the Germans far more than they were in their industrial capacities. And this quote here from Hermann Oberth, who was a pioneer of rocket design for the Third Reich during World War II, also called the father of rocketry, he was quoted as stating that we cannot take credit for our record advancement in certain scientific fields alone. We have been helped, he says, and we have been helped by people of other worlds. This is a very famous quote, and he could be referring to Maria Orsic and the Vril Society and how they were channeling the messages from these extraterrestrial beings, but he also could have been referring to the reptilians offering the hand-me-downs of technology. So we don't know which extraterrestrials Hermann Oberth was referring to. We don't know what Hermann Oberth was read in on, how much he was aware of, but regardless, this quote is showing us that the Germans had help from non-terrestrial beings that were not of this planet. And now let's discuss how the Americans were obtaining their technology. And there was a few different means by which they did that. They were able to obtain extraterrestrial technology in crashes in the Battle of LA and in Roswell, and then there were also scientists in America that were helping them advance their capabilities. So let's discuss these. First, let's talk about the Battle of LA. Now, the Battle of LA, we talked about this in the first webinar last week, but it goes to mention here in a little bit more in depth. And in February 24th, 1942, radar instruments in Long Beach Harbor identified a craft approaching from about 120 miles offshore. But very soon after, this craft disappeared from the radar screens, so they didn't think much of it. On February 25th, very early in the morning, about 2 or 3 in the morning, radar picks up this craft again just a few miles offshore. And when eyewitnesses reported planes being seen in the sky, what they thought were planes at least, anti-aircraft artillery began opening fire, and over 1,400 rounds of ammunition were shot at the craft with no damage being done to the craft. And quickly after this event, the Secretary of the Navy and the Army quickly rebuked the event as being caused by, quote, war jitters or, quote, unidentified enemy craft. But they were very flimsy excuses, and even many of the papers in the region, in LA there, were questioning how they were covering up the incident. And there was a lot of unanswered questions they had. And the LA Examiner, for instance, reported that eyewitnesses saw 50 planes slowly traveling in a V formation. And this actually corroborates the testimony of William Tompkins, because according to him, there was not just one mothership, as you can see in this picture of the incident, but there was actually many different craft being circular craft, triangular craft, even rectangular craft that emanated from this mothership. And then also, according to Tompkins, senior officials at Lockheed, Douglas, and even within the military, the Navy, witnessed these events, and it had a revolutionary impact on their perspectives of our place in the cosmos, essentially. And then Tompkins also stated that 2 craft were downed by the anti-aircraft artillery fire. It didn't do any damage to the mothership that was there, but a couple craft were shot down, one in the sea, and then one, I believe, over the San Bernardino Mountains. And then Tompkins stated that the Navy was able to garner the craft that went down in the ocean, and then the Army took the craft that went down over the land. And these craft actually were not piloted by any beings, they were drones. So it's very interesting to then speculate as to why this instance occurred, the whole Battle of LA. And, it could have been such that we were let to shoot down these drones to then get them and be able to reverse engineer them to technologically advance us. So there's a lot of interesting speculations that we can do on that. But nonetheless, these craft were downed, they were taken into the military, and then the one that the Army at least captured, and possibly the Navy, was taken to Wright Field Base in Ohio because that's where their reverse engineering programs were being done. And not only were these reverse engineering programs being done on the Battle of LA, which the craft they got in 1942, but then, of course, Roswell, very famous incident that occurred in 1947, where the Army Air Force at the time was able to obtain crashed saucers that crashed near Roswell, New Mexico. Could have been 1 or more, possibly 2 or 3 craft that was downed and then taken again to Wright Field Base in Ohio to reverse engineer. And then, of course, we'll get into the scientists that were helping the Americans during this time. We have, of course, Nikola Tesla. Now, Nikola Tesla, much is known about the myriad of research that he pioneered, especially what he called radiant energy, or that some term as free energy. But little is known about his interest in anti-gravity technologies that he delved into near the end of his life. And before his death, Nikola Tesla developed blueprints for a propulsion system that he termed as being a space drive. And then he also went into a theoretical framework to describe gravity that he called his dynamic theory of gravity. And while he was unable to continue his research into this phenomena due to the suppression that he was undergoing and then his subsequent death in 1943, he was able to pass down many of these ideas to a protege of his, that protege being Otis Carr. And then Otis Carr was able to actually build a workable flying saucer into the 1950s and 60s that was termed the OTCX-1. So a lot came about from Nikola Tesla. And of course, when he died in his New York apartment in 1943, a lot of his research and his papers were soon swooped up by the FBI and then highly classified. So you can only imagine what then the military-industrial complex was able to get from taking his papers. And not only did we have Nikola Tesla, but we had T. Townsend Brown. Now, Thomas Townsend Brown was an American physicist and a leader in developing these theories concerning the link between electricity and gravity. He termed it as being electrogravitics, and he was pioneering this work as early as the 1920s. And then he soon advanced his work from theory to application, where he found that taking metal discs and applying a high voltage electrostatic charge to them would actually make them levitate. And he did various experiments with discs even up to multiple feet in width and would fly them around at up to hundreds of miles an hour publicly in public stunts that he would do. And his work then later became classified near the end of his career, and mystery surrounds what activities Brown then became involved in. Some say that he became a consultant for the Navy on black projects concerning this electrogravitic propulsion. Others say that the Navy actually turned him down because they were already working on these advanced electrogravitic projects, and that Thomas Townsend Brown was sworn to silence. But regardless, his work ended up in the military complex, and they then were able to take from his research what they needed to. And again, this was as early as the 20s and up to the 1950s that the American military was garnering his work, getting his work. So now let's go into a little bit of World War II relearning, some re-education that we have to do with the topics surrounding World War II, because it didn't actually end in 1945. So let's discuss this. And let's first talk about esoteric Nazism. So during World War II, the Germans believed that winning the war wouldn't come down to what was termed as quantitative superiority. Quantitative superiority meaning that more boots on the ground, more tanks, more planes, more bombs, a quantity of force. They believed that what was called qualitative superiority would win them the war, essentially having more advanced technologies. So because of this, the Nazi SS and the various German secret societies that were working in tandem with them were very devoted to searching, finding, and deciphering esoteric research, esoteric in this instance just meaning hidden research and information from around the world. So in the 1930s, the Germans set to explore various regions of the world to obtain this research. So of course they were already getting a lot of this research through unconventional means, such as Maria Orsick's channeling and whatnot, but they also conducted expeditions to remote parts of Tibet to gather this intelligence. And the information received through all the various means they were doing pointed to Antarctica as being an area that would not only contain secrets, which could have been ruins of an ancient civilization, could have been an entrance to inner Earth regions that the Nazis were interested in, but it could also be a military advantage to them to help them actually win World War II. So because of Antarctica now being on their radar, they took down a lot of their research and development to Antarctica in the early 1900s and before World War II. So William Tompkins states that these German secret societies began moving their supplies and equipment down to Antarctica as early as 1913. And a quote of his says, "The move from Germany to Antarctica was an operation from 1934 and way before the World War started. In fact, some of the stuff went down in 1913. And this corroborates to a public expedition that the Germans did that was termed as the Second German Antarctic Expedition that ran from 1911 to 1913. So there could have been a couple decades there that the Germans were slowly and secretly taking their research, their development, their equipment, could have even been taking their flying saucer technologies down to Antarctica. And then the Germans were essentially too late to develop enough of this technology to dominate Europe. Again, because of their interest in more advanced technology rather than their interest in boots on the ground. The Nazis didn't necessarily have the industrial might that the Allies did. So during the height of World War II, because they did not have this industrial might, they essentially lost the ground war in Europe. I don't want to say lost, I want to say essentially gave it up. So near the end of World War II, or at least the official end of World War II in 1945, the Germans, the Nazis and their secret societies escaped, and they brought, like I said, their research and development down to Antarctica, and then some of them also escaped down to South America. There was a large Nazi influence in Argentina, in Chile, and various places in South America during World War II. So it was only natural for them, because of their influence in South America, to find where they could develop in Antarctica near that. And then in 1945, during the right after the official end of World War II, Operation Paperclip then went into effect. And it goes to note here, before I discuss Operation Paperclip, is that there were what we could term cabal influences or deep state influences, if you want to call them that, in both America and Germany before World War II. Of course, the Federal Reserve was set up in America in 1913, and there was a lot of nefarious factions that had infiltrated into American society pre-World War II, right? It's often said that both sides of the war are funded, but it goes to note here that German or essentially Nazi Germany was much more infiltrated than the American society was. There was still a lot of patriots, a lot of people working for good in American society pre-World War II. Okay, but now we get into 1945. So this is after the end, or the official end of World War II, and let's discuss Operation Paperclip. So Operation Paperclip was a secret program that was commissioned by the Joint Intelligence Objective Agency, in which German scientists and technicians were recruited in post-war Germany and taken to the U.S. for government employment. Of course, these were the German scientists and technicians that were still in Germany, not the ones that had went to South America and to Antarctica. And between 1945 and 1959, more than 1,500 people were recruited, most of them former members or former leaders of the Nazi Party. And then the ET, the extraterrestrial proxy war, essentially shifted from a Nazi-American war into using factions within the American military complex, you see? So then it expands out from there, and we'll discuss that. But in 1947, the Americans, through their naval espionage programs that William Tompkins was a part of, and also from the German scientists that they were able to bring over from Germany, they found out about the Germans taking of their craft and their research and their most prominent people down to Antarctica. So the American military, the American Navy more specifically, commissioned what was termed as Operation High Jump. So Operation High Jump was a U.S. Navy commissioned operation led by Admiral Richard Byrd that started in late 1946 and ended in early 1947. And it was said to be a scientific expedition on public record, but that was of course cover, because no military mission is going to use, no scientific mission is going to use 5,000 men, 13 ships, and 33 aircraft. So calling it a scientific mission was cover for it actually being a military mission that was commissioned to go down to Antarctica and snuff out the Nazi bases that they were building down there. But after reaching Antarctica in December 1946, the mission was called to a very abrupt ending in February 1947, only 8 weeks later. It was originally said this mission was going to last from 6 to 9 months, but only lasted 6 to 8 weeks. And the reason it only lasted 6 to 8 weeks was because after reaching Antarctica, the mission was attacked by German groups with their advanced flying saucer craft. And in this picture here, you can see the area that the Germans claimed that they called Neuschwabenland, which is very close to South America here. This was the area that they had began building their bases in. And of course, when Admiral Richard Byrd and his forces went down there, they were attacked by saucer craft that the Germans were able to build up enough to attack Richard Byrd's mission with, and then absolutely destroyed them. They had particle beam weapons that they were handed down, and their craft were amazingly fast. The Americans were not able to keep up with their technological advancements. And then after retreating, on March 5th, 1947, a Chilean newspaper was quoting Admiral Richard Byrd in an interview of theirs. And in this interview, they said, Admiral Richard Byrd declared today that it was imperative for the United States to initiate immediate defense measures against hostile regions. Furthermore, Byrd stated that he, quote, didn't want to frighten anyone unduly, end quote, but it was a, quote, bitter reality that in case of a new war, the continental U.S. would be attacked by flying objects which could fly from pole to pole at incredible speeds. So that quote in that interview by the Chilean newspaper shows us that Admiral Richard Byrd's forces were attacked by flying objects that could move, he termed it, from pole to pole. So essentially from one point on the Earth to the other point on the Earth at incredible speeds. And Richard Byrd was shocked. He was frightened by it. He didn't know what he was going to encounter down there. And obviously what he encountered overwhelmed him, and they were not able to accomplish their mission of destroying the Nazi bases. So this then leads us into discussing James Forrestal. Now we are in about 1949 here, and in 1949, James Forrestal was the last cabinet-level U.S. Secretary of the Navy and the inaugural Secretary of Defense. And according to William Tompkins, James Forrestal played a pivotal role in not only the Navy's espionage programs that infiltrated the German secret space programs, but he was also well aware of the UFO issue and this extraterrestrial proxy war that was going on. And Tompkins also alleges that the Nordic extraterrestrials directly assisted and influenced James Forrestal. And Forrestal was embattled with many policy struggles in the administration that he was in, especially with one Stuart Symington, who was the first Secretary of the U.S. Air Force. Now, Forrestal wanted disclosure of this UFO issue and the associated technologies, but due to the Air Force and CIA infiltration that was occurring, he lost these battles and he was forced out of the service in March of 1949, and then 2 months later, he was found dead in a naval hospital, the psych ward actually, that he was admitted to, and it was claimed that he committed suicide. But of course, there was a lot of unanswered questions, a lot of mysterious things going on surrounding his death here, and many believe that he was not, in fact, he did not in fact commit suicide, but that he was assassinated to shut him up, because he was soon to be released from that psych ward. He was improving. They were going to get him out of there. And those groups that did not want disclosure of the UFO and extraterrestrial issues wanted him silenced. So now that brings us into 1952. So Operation Paperclip had been going on for a few years now. James Forrestal had been silenced, and in 1952 there was a mass UFO sighting that occurred right over the U.S. Capitol. And around 11:40 p.m. on July 19th, 1952, multiple UFOs were spotted in a mass sighting over the Capitol building and the White House in Washington, D.C. More sightings of UFOs by pilots and Air Force officers occurred a week later on July 26th. So in subsequent weeks, there were multiple sightings of these anomalous objects in the sky over the Capitol in Washington, D.C. And on July 29th, 3 days after the second sighting there, official Air Force and intelligence agency explanations stated that the objects were, quote, misidentified aerial phenomena, meaning that they were stars or meteors or weather balloons or something to that effect. So they were trying to put a cover story on these sightings. Some stated that they were not in fact extraterrestrial craft or the misidentified aerial phenomenon, but they were in fact Nazi craft, Nazi Bell craft, and their saucers being shown over the U.S. Capitol essentially as a show of force to the Americans, saying, hey, we have better technology than you. We still have our forces in Antarctica, and we can fly over your capital with no regard. And it essentially forced America's hand to bring the rest of the Nazis into the American military complex, because the Americans did not want to disclose the ET issue. They didn't want to cause the public panic that would have ensued. And of course, there was already some nefarious factions infiltrating into the American military complex. So with this show of force of the Nazis flying their craft over the Capitol, that was the last straw, essentially. That was them showing their superiority and being able to infiltrate the last of their people into the military-industrial complex in America. So let's talk about Tompkins' assistance from the Nordics. Of course, we discussed this in the first webinar we did last week, but it goes to note again because of this proxy war now taking place in the American military-industrial complex rather than in separate nations across the Atlantic Ocean. So William Tompkins details in his book, Selected by Extraterrestrials, that came out in 2015, that he had direct assistance from Nordic extraterrestrial beings when designing spacecraft in a Douglas aircraft think tank and for the Navy between the years of 1951 and 1963. So Tompkins also states that there was infiltration by the reptilian allied Nazi groups into all levels of the military-industrial complex, even including Douglas. to derail the Navy's secret space programs. So with these admissions by William Tompkins, it shows that both extraterrestrial groups trying to assist us and end the reptilian influence, and also nefarious groups, the reptilian-aligned Nazis, were infiltrating almost all aspects of the military-industrial complex. Tompkins stated that at Douglas, over 75% of their projects were for the Navy and for more benevolent usage, but even in Douglas, a small percentage of those contracts were going to the Air Force. And then there were also other corporate contractors that were being infiltrated by these Nazi groups that were aligned more so with the CIA and the Air Force and nefarious factions that were doing work for them. So it's a very complex situation that we have different factions with different agendas, some trying to help, some trying to conquer, and so it became a very complex situation. And that brings us to 1963 in the Kennedy assassination. Now, it goes to note that John F. Kennedy was standing up to, we could call them the deep state, in many ways. He was standing up to the bankers and various other groups, but he was also very interested in the UFO phenomenon, and this might have actually been the straw that broke the camel's back for him. It might have been the very last straw that got him assassinated. So let's discuss why the UFO issue might have been the final one for him. So Kennedy actually had a close relationship with James Forrestal, and Forrestal introduced Kennedy to the UFO issue during a trip to Germany in July of 1945, right after the ending of the European conflict there. So when Kennedy witnessed some of the Nazi electrogravitic saucer technologies that they weren't able to take down to Antarctica, basically the prototypes and whatnot that they had to leave in Germany, when Kennedy saw these things, he was enthralled and he became very interested in this subject. Many believe that the disclosure of UFO files and technologies within secret space programs, like I said, was that final straw, and this was the main reason that Kennedy was assassinated. And the reason that many believe this is because 10 days before John F. Kennedy's assassination on November 22nd, 1963, so this being on November 12th, 1963, he penned two different memos. The unclassified memo he penned was entitled the National Security Action Memorandum number 271, and the subject header of this was stating cooperation with the USSR on outer space matters. So John F. Kennedy wanted to essentially end the Cold War. He wanted to work with the Soviet Union, and the topic he wanted to work with them on was on outer space, one topic that could unite us all. And the top secret memo that he penned, also the same day, November 12th, 1963, 10 days before his assassination, this top secret memo was to this then CIA Director John McCone, and this had the subject classification review on all UFO intelligence files affecting national security. So essentially what he was doing is within the American intelligence agencies, he was wanting to figure out the UFO intelligence files and begin declassifying them, and then on a grander scale, on a more public scale, start working with the USSR on outer space matters. So it was a multifold operation here, in that he wanted to gather the UFO files, gather that intelligence on the secret space programs, and then in a slow process, roll them out publicly and begin working with other nations on these space programs. So with these memos being penned 10 days before his death in Dallas on November 22nd, 1963, this is corroborative evidence showing that it was in fact the UFO issue that was the deepest one, the one that the cabal or the deep state did not want getting out, and thus caused them to assassinate John F. Kennedy. So after 1963, we now move on into the 70s and 80s. And into the 1970s and 80s, the Navy and the Air Force were then building out both of their secret space programs. And the deep state, of course, garnered more control within their special access programs that they were developing out at these times. And in the 1970s and 80s, they were able to develop a fleet of advanced craft, including what's known as the Black Triangle, or the TR-3B. And this photograph we have here is an artist's depiction of those TR-3Bs that are very large black triangles that use not only electrogravitic technologies, but they also use mass cancellation technologies hand in hand. So they're silent craft, they can go very, very fast, and they use a multitude of different black project technologies in their systems. And according to William Tompkins, the Navy space program, otherwise known as Solar Warden, which we'll discuss a little bit more of, was not built in operation until the 1980s because of all this infiltration that was occurring and all the setbacks that was going on. But Tompkins says that the Solar Warden program became operational in the 1980s, and it was actually built mainly at China Lake Research Station, and then the Cigar craft and the other craft for the Navy space program was built in the Wasatch Mountains in Utah, in giant underground bases there. So when this naval program finally became operational in the 80s, they surpassed the advancements of the Air Force and CIA aligned programs, with their craft now becoming operational. And now let's talk about the missing money and some evidence of these space programs that's all coming out now, that's coming out much more recently than decades ago. So in 1983, let's discuss what was known as Franklin Spinney's Spinney Report, where Franklin Spinney was a former military analyst for the Pentagon, and he became famous in the early 1980s for penning two reports that later became known as the Spinney Reports. And in these reports, he described the reckless pursuit of costly, complex weapon systems by the Department of Defense. And in 1983, Senator Chuck Grassley, who was a Republican out of Iowa, caught wind of these reports and asked to interview the author being Franklin Spinney. But he was met with opposition by then Secretary of Defense and also by Spinney's immediate supervisor in the Pentagon. They did not want Franklin Spinney talking to Senator Chuck Grassley. But Chuck Grassley threatened to subpoena Spinney, so the Pentagon agreed to hold a meeting, but they agreed to hold this meeting in a very remote room with no cameras because they hoped that it would go unnoticed. They didn't want the light being shed on their very reckless pursuit of costly, complex weapon systems, as Spinney had termed it. So Grassley did not like this, and he actually moved the hearing to a very large room that had cameras in it. And funny enough, it was this very same room that the McCarthy hearings that had been done in. And because it had been moved to this larger room, had cameras, a lot of people caught wind of it, and Spinney's story exploded in popularity, so much so that he was even given the cover of a Time magazine report in 1983. So Franklin Spinney's report was the first in a lot of reports that were to come out in the future that detailed a lot of essentially missing money from the Pentagon. But now we're going to jump to 1985 here in one of Reagan's journal entries. So keep that missing money in mind. We will discuss that a little bit more so in a few minutes here. But let's discuss Ronald Reagan's journal entry that happened that he penned on June 11th, 1985. So on June 11th, 1985, Ronald Reagan penned in his presidential diary that he had lunch with 5 top space scientists. He said it was fascinating. Space truly is the last frontier, and some developments there in astronomy and etc. are like science fiction, except they are real. I learned that our shuttle capacity is such that we could orbit 300 people. Now, what's very interesting about this testimonial is that at the time, in 1985, NASA's official shuttle program at the time could only orbit about 50 people. They had 5 shuttles, and at a max of 11 people per shuttle, each shuttle being stocked to full capacity, they could only orbit about 50 to 55 people. And so Reagan was making it publicly known that he had been briefed on a space program that was completely separate of NASA's. And we can then gather that he was likely briefed on various Air Force and CIA programs. We don't know essentially what programs he was briefed on, whether it was the Navy's, the Air Force's, different programs within the Navy program or Navy or the Air Force. But what we can gather here from this journal entry is that he was briefed on a secret program that was outside of the Navy's and much more advanced. Now let's fast forward to the year 2000, and let's discuss Gary McKinnon finding evidence of the naval programs. So Gary McKinnon was a systems administrator who hacked into NASA and DoD computers from London over a 12-month period in 2000 and 2001. Actually, from his mom's house, he did this. And during this 12-month period that he was hacking these computers, he wanted to find existence of free energy and UFO cover-ups. He was very interested in this topic. And while in the military systems, he found various documents detailing what were known as fleet-to-fleet transfers. He saw the document stating, and he also found documents stating non-terrestrial officers, and he also found a list of ships that said USS on the document. Now, the list of non-terrestrial officers, he saw there was approximately 30 to 40 names he said he saw on there, and there was approximately a list of 10 to 15 ships. And when he tried to cross-reference the names of these ships, he couldn't find any of these names in existing Navy ships that were, of course, water-faring ships, not spacecraft. So he believed they were names of off-world naval spacecraft. And in March 2002, police began interviewing him, and then soon after they interviewed him, they seized his computers. And in November 2002, a federal grand jury indicted him, and this federal grand jury was in America, in the state of Virginia. And McKinnon then fought extradition for over 10 years until 2012, when Prime Minister Theresa May in the UK announced that the House of Commons had blocked his extradition. And he actually gained worldwide recognition for this hack. There was questions about him being raised to former President Obama and former Prime Minister David Cameron in 2010. And also in 2009, a former Pink Floyd member, David Gilmour, released a song to promote awareness of McKinnon's situation. So this is a pretty high-profile hack that was occurred. The various sources in America stated that it was one of the biggest hacks of all time. And it gives direct evidence of Gary McKinnon finding the fleet-to-fleet transfers, non-terrestrial officers, and naval spacecraft that was termed the Solar Warden program. So now let's talk a little bit more about the missing money. We're now up to the year 2001. And the day before 9/11, on September 10th, 2001, then Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld testified in front of congressional leaders about $2.3 trillion that were, quote, unaccounted for from the Pentagon. And his excuse to avoid an audit of the Pentagon, because, mind you, up until this year, the Pentagon has never conducted an audit or has been audited. And his excuse, Donald Rumsfeld's excuse to avoid an audit, was that it would take too much manpower and too much time to complete. Now, this admission of his actually gained some mainstream media attention. And you can see these pictures here, one being from CBS Evening News, the other one being a local CBS report, actually discussed the war on waste and this $2.3 trillion being unaccounted for. So very interesting that it picked up a little bit of mainstream attention, but of course the next day, September 11th, 2001, the World Trade Center attack happened, and many people then forgot about Donald Rumsfeld's admissions there. So it kind of got swept under the rug, lost in the wind, if you want to call it that. And not many people then understood the implications of trillions of dollars being missing from the DoD budget. Let's fast forward 14 years now to 2015. In 2015, multiple media outlets, in 2016, media outlets reported on a 2015 Department of Defense Inspector General report that stated that the Army had made $2.8 trillion of wrongful adjustments just in a single quarter, and they had made $6.5 trillion of wrongful adjustments in that full fiscal year. So that number jumped from $2.3 trillion in 2011 to $6.5 trillion of unaccounted for taxpayer money in 2015. And the report concluded that the Army's financial statements for 2015 were materially misstated, and the forced adjustments rendered the statements essentially useless because the DoD and Army managers could not rely on the data in their account systems when making management and resource decisions. So this Inspector General report was putting the Army and the DoD on blast for their awful and their wrongful adjustments, as they called it, and all of their very odd, all the money essentially they couldn't account for. And I want to now show you a little bit of truth in plain sight that came out by Hollywood, and that comes out by way of Independence Day, the movie Independence Day that came out in 1995, the first ones. And a quote from this movie when the president in Independence Day was taken down to Area 51 and he was showing all the stuff that he had never known about before. The president in the movie, played by Bill Pullman, stated, "I don't understand. Where does all this come from?" He was talking about Area 51. "How do you get funding for something like this?" And then the actor Judd Hirsch in the movie, who was right beside the president, stated, "You don't actually think they spend $20,000 on a hammer and $30,000 on a toilet seat, do you?" And that's essentially a great quote right there, some truth in plain sight that can give you an idea on how this money easily gets taken. Because in these reports, when the various contractors and people working on the projects, when they sign off on them, they sign off on very expensive equipment that costs far more than it actually does. So a lot of this money is then siphoned off into unacknowledged special access projects that aren't on official books, and this money then gets lost into the ether, that you could say. But it's not lost. You see, it's very accounted for. It's not unaccounted for. It's just accounted for by people that are off the books, that are bringing it into whatever programs that they want to develop out. And now that brings us into 2017 here. And in 2017, a Michigan State University economist named Mark Skidmore worked with a team of graduate students and even a former government official and found that that number in unauthorized spending from the Department of Defense was now up to $21 trillion. And this only wasn't from the Department of Defense, but it was also from the Housing and Urban Development Department there. And this was all in only the years of 1998 to 2015. And he got interested in this when he heard Catherine Austin Fitts, the former Assistant Secretary of the HUD, mention the Inspector General's report noting the missing $6.5 trillion. So he took his team and found that that number, just in 17 years, had gone up to $21 trillion. So that being said, there has been an amazing amount of resources that have been siphoned off from different agencies of our government into black projects. So that begs the question, where did this money go? And it's some easy dots can be connected there, that this money went into off-the-book projects that have some amazing technologies, some amazing science and research within them that are kept from the American public, from the world essentially. And there could be a whole host of spacecraft. This photo here depicts a classified space station that could have even been built. And according to many whistleblower testimony, we even have military stations that have been built not only on the moon, but on Mars and other planets even. So $21 trillion, and possibly even more than that, you can literally build breakaway civilizations, spacecraft, space stations, installations on other worlds, other moons, and also a lot of stuff underground, a lot of top secret deep underground military bases with this money. So that being said, full disclosure of all of this will absolutely revolutionize our society. We have not needed fossil fuels on this planet for decades. And there's life extension technologies and propulsion systems and sciences that can make time travel and Stargate technology, much of this stuff an absolute reality. But the only way that we're going to get full disclosure is by demanding it, is by informing ourselves as to really what's going on, sharing that information with those around us, and all of us together demanding the full disclosure of the research, the science, the technologies, and the resources that have been kept from the world. So that is my presentation that I wanted to share with you. That's essentially how a lot of these modern secret space programs have been built out over the last 100 years. And now we are going to move into the film footage of William Tompkins and Corey Goode meeting for the very first time, and they discuss a lot of amazing things in this meet that they had. So I hope you enjoy this meeting between those two. Thank you very much. Great.
Okay, this propaganda thing, it wants to go back a little bit to Germany. And they're the past masters at propaganda. So that at TRW, the number came up at 97% of the German people had no knowledge of what Germany was doing.
It was paperclip people that taught us MK Ultra,
Yeah.
which was mind control. They had developed mind control very thoroughly.
Yeah.
And after paperclip, we received the protocols from them
Yes,
on how to.
from them.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
And where did they get it?
You know, how did they get it?
Reptilians who've been mind controlling and take the planet for
And
at least 6,000 years unbroken.
6,000 years. So we've been under that control by them for that whole time, and we're being lied to completely. This situation with this tremendous facility in Hollywood as a propaganda control center. This gets into Salt Lake City. And so now a background of who were actually top extraterrestrials that were running the Mormon religion. This got us to Uncle Harding, the doctor in Santa Monica, who was my uncle. And he was chief surgeon at Santa Monica Hospital, doctor. And he's spending all the time over in the pyramids. What do the pyramids have to do with Salt Lake City? What do the two of them have to do with a propaganda program in Hollywood? All this stuff is coming together. The trips that he makes, the people that bring artifacts back to my dad's or my uncle's house in Santa Monica. Sometimes we would come there from Hollywood and there would be boxes full of artifacts from Egypt out in the backyard. Inside, all of the rooms would be filled full. That would be there for 2, 3, 4 weeks. Then all of it's gone. Where did it go?
Right.
Where did all this stuff go? Why was he doing this? What's his relation with Salt Lake City? What's my dad doing?
With the Mason connection.
Oh,
The Mason connection also, Masons were very instrumental in creating this country, but there's a tie-in to Nordics there, because during the time that they were contemplating starting the United States and during the process of creating documentation and all that, the various people were visited by angels that were blonde-haired, blue-eyed angels.
Yeah.
So the Nordics have been guiding the creation of the United States and how it's evolved from the very beginning.
Yes. Even George Washington.
Yes.
Okay. Freemason, and half of them there.
Yeah.
All of our astronauts are Freemasons. Every top man in NASA on the Apollo program were all Freemasons. All of them. And nobody will admit this. And they don't reveal who they are, what they do. So what I'm trying to say, Corey, is that this thing in Hollywood was a massive organization to disseminate whatever it is that you want them to know about.
Right.
Okay? And it's a continuous vehicle. And this then is implementing somebody's something. Okay?
Well, they are basically manipulating the collective consciousness of the planet by doing this. And there are different non-terrestrial groups that want to guide the mass consciousness in different directions. Some of the negative groups, they want to keep us ignorant.
Yes.
And like the Nordic and the tall whites and some of these other groups, they want us, their main message is raise your vibration, raise your consciousness, and disseminate these hidden technologies to the masses. Those are the main two things they deliver to people, that message.
Okay, now you use the word vibrations. I have to say, for whatever reason, I have a high acceptance of vibrations. I don't know what that is, but like I'm vibrating right now when I'm talking with you. Okay?
Everything's vibrating around us.
Yeah. And to me, that's another source of what's behind this. It's another source. It's not just using it as a vibration as a word.
Right.
But frequency that we're really being vibrated is a frequency.
Right.
And again, this can be done at a lower level, or it can be done at a very, very high level of whatever it is they want us to implement.
Right.
Okay? But this Hollywood thing, it's crazy, because we went from Hollywood to Santa Monica, Uncle Harding, the pyramids, the whole ball of wax, okay? But it all relates it back to information being implemented into different people. And then, as you said, essentially we have white and black hat people. We got boxes full of them. The Jinses. There's good guys and there's bad guys that we're dealing with. And unfortunately, we have to accept this is taking place and try to counter it. And I think that the subject that's being discussed today is a method, a perfect method to do this.
Yeah. What is the old saying? The devil's greatest achievement was convincing us he wasn't real.
Yes, right.
Yeah, that's the greatest propaganda of all.
Yeah, the number one. I'd like to get you to give me your feel for what we're doing, what we're saying. This whole thing is being implemented, whether we accept it or not, by different people's agendas. And we're just part of that implementing operation.
I feel like a piece on a chessboard.
Yeah,
to be honest.
right. Yes, I do too. Yeah, I agree with you.
Right.
And these guys are using us, okay? I'm being facetious.
We're assets.
Yeah. But what I'm trying to say is to get this word out, I think it's extremely important that this information be disseminated and that enough of it gets available that we can actually count the numbers of people that accept.
And the whole topic that you've been bringing up here of Hollywood and propaganda, we are approaching, as Roger has stated, they covertly control the way people think. We want to overtly use the same tools that they're using for propaganda as a way to free the mind.
To reverse it.
Hollywood, we can use Hollywood. We can use
Yes.
all these different tools to push our agenda. And our agenda is an open one, and it is one of freeing minds.
Yes.
And what's tied into that too is that Corey's talked about in the testimony on cosmic disclosure about the hijacking of the collective consciousness to use against us to enslave us. And so through Hollywood propaganda, by disseminating certain things, whether it's fear propaganda or, focused on, an earthquake or whatever, the idea is to plant that seed in the consciousness.
Co-creative consciousness.
If we're all lenses projecting our reality here around us, they are introducing the theme into these lenses to try to bring people together to project this reality. And so in the same way, if we as a collective in humanity decide to start accessing our creative side, which is the most inspirational, most divine connection we have.
It's divine.
Yeah, exactly. If we start accessing that in a creative way and putting these things out there, that's what we're doing. We're seeding that collective consciousness, and we're aligning those lenses into the truth and bringing people into the truth. It's like what Corey said. It's essentially adopting these techniques, but putting out there openly and then supporting the whole creative side of that.
Yeah.
We want to go toe to toe with them as much as we can.
Absolutely.
As much as we can.
It's time, this time period with what's going on, the time is very short. The window is very small for us to make a large difference. And I think that's why so many people are being guided, whether it be by the Nordics, the Blue Avians, the Blues, or all of them working together. They're bringing all of us together, and you see people come together without egos. People are not coming together thinking, well, that's my work. I don't want to mix my work with your. People are coming together, and they're, for the first time in this field, they're open to working together and trying to make.
To accept it.
Yes.
They're open to accept it.
Right. So this is a very interesting time.
Yeah, it really is.
Yeah.
It's completely different than what people think it is. It's
those are our targets. Those people.
That's the target. Yeah.
I got a question about your dad here. Do you have any understanding or idea of what happened that put him on the rocks with the Masons? Like,
it had to be significant.
Yeah. You have any idea what he was doing?
There's just a whole bunch of them. Okay. A whole lot of different things that it could have taken place that basically he didn't want to be the instrument to do this bad stuff, okay? And he had argued with the people in New York. He'd argued with the people, which is essentially the Trilateral, the Bilderberg, okay? And so they chopped his water off. Now, I can't say that was the reason, but I'm only saying that that was the most prominent of what in the world happened to Dad. Why did he? And then I guess this is being photographed, but I'm going to say it anyway. I have a brother that's 2 years older than me, okay? He's an idiot. Not just a dumb guy. He's insane. Firstborn. You don't believe firstborn back in ancient times in Europe? You say, I don't believe that, okay? Somebody has to take the heat. My brother took the heat. They chopped him down from when he was a kid. He's been a kid 2 years older than me. He's still alive, right here in San Diego. He's an idiot. He took the hit. The firstborn took the hit. You see, that's just a saying. No, it's not just a saying. This is real. Sometimes if it's the youngest boy or girl that the father loves, kill that one.
Yeah.
Okay, and it's not just the Secretary of the Navy being murdered because he's talking too much. Forrestal, okay? Forrestal selected Rick Abada. Wow. Forrestal selected Rick Abada to do that thing with all the operatives. Not a four-star admiral from Annapolis that knows everything, okay? What are we seeing here? This thing is far more complicated and into different areas, and it goes way back. It didn't start last week.
Yeah, people want a nice bullet point cookie cutter history, but it's so complex. It's as complex as that drawing that you had out.
Yeah,
I mean, it's
and you're right, and we have to try to tell them what's happened, get them to accept the position to start asking questions, because you're not gonna get them to believe you all the time. But if we can get them to start asking questions about this, we're making headway. But this has been going on a long time.
as long since before they put us here.
Yeah, and you don't murder presidents. You don't murder secretaries of the Navy. I mean, come on, you don't do that. But yes, they do. You get too far out of line and you're going to be taken out. That, fortunately, has slowed down because there's enough push by the Nordics, particularly, to, quite frankly, keep me driving the freeway with enough headway time to turn off to the next lane before this crash took place.
Yes.
and took out 11 cars. Okay.
I've had a number of those types of situations.
And so somebody's helping Bill and Mary, my girlfriend. Okay. Somebody's helping me. Situations I can name them hundreds of times.
Yeah.
I'm being not just allowed to do this, okay, like he is, but
Guided and protected.
you're being guided and protected, whether you want to, and that includes you, sir. You're being assisted.
Yeah.
We know. We are.
Yeah.
It's just. It is so obvious.
You can implement. They couldn't. They can't. But you can.
Exactly.
And that's not a joke.
And there are cosmic laws that keep them from coming down and implementing them on their own.
Yeah.
And they've told me that the cosmos is a huge bureaucracy, and there are a lot of cosmic laws that the benevolent ones stick to. The good guys stick to these laws. The bad guys, of course, just like here on Earth, they skirt the laws and skirt free will.
They're trying to come in the back door and do it anyway.
Right.
Yeah.
I heard that you were giving these briefings and delivering these packets, and people were like, "This is just crazy."
Yeah. Regardless of what you say, they don't buy it, you know. And but then they're given a contract. Okay, they're given a contract, and they're going to get paid, but it's a requirement contract. It's not that you can say you're Lockheed, and you can say, "Well, that's interesting, but we're not interested." Okay, that's not going to work. And I think your point is so well taken. Regardless almost of what you say, they're only going to believe part of it. And they're not really going to be with you, okay, on what you're trying to implement.
Right. Once you step outside their reality bubble, it's like, it can't be real.
Yeah, and you get turned off. They get turned off.
I've had many occasions to where a lot of like what you were talking about having guidance or information given to you, or you are doing something and you don't know how you know you're doing it.
Yeah, right.
You know, I've had that happen, many times. And I've also had when I was recently doing a briefing for this group called the Anshar. They're inner Earth people, white haired.
Yeah.
I was giving a briefing to this. What was his? He was a physicist.
Yeah.
I can't remember the type of physicist, but he started asking me all these physics questions. Going into the conversation that you can't go faster than the speed. The whole Einstein spiel, and then all of a sudden, Kari came through and started giving me what to say. I had no earthly idea what I was saying.
Oh, no kidding.
His face went blank and his lost color in his cheeks as he was sitting there.
Wow.
I was talking about all of these complex quantum physics
way out
models. Yeah, I mean, the stuff I would understand, like quantum entanglement.
Yeah.
But then they would take quantum entanglement. They took it onto a deeper level of a lot, kind of like what Jan was talking about. Everything in time and space is connected.
Yeah.
And so I'm like giving all this information, and he gets up and throws his hands up and says, "I can't accept this," and walks out.
Oh, you're
of the
kidding.
meeting. And I've now had about a little over a dozen people get up and walk out in the middle of giving briefings.
Wow.
Saying basically, "I can't accept this."
Yeah.
Or they'll sit there looking around like with a stupid grin on their face, like they think it's a joke.
Yeah.
They're like looking at the people like,
they
look back at me.
They were not with you.
No, they were not. They were not following me.
The Vatican's got these files underneath the ground, and they have all the information.
Yes.
Everything there.
Right.
Okay. But
the School of Alexandria, they have all that.
But wait a minute. They still want me to drink this blood. Okay. I got to drink blood.
And eat flesh.
And I got to eat flesh. Wait a minute.
Yeah.
Wait a minute. What did we just say? And every Sunday I got to do this? I thought the eating of flesh was what we're not going to talk about in front of the kids. They're being taught that in Sunday school. Okay? Wow. Wait a minute. What are you saying? I got to drink his blood? Holy cats.
And the belief is that as you consume it, it actually becomes the blood and the flesh.
Yeah.
From symbol to reality.
And like Father O'Connor in that little church over in the San Fernando Valley, I mean, this guy didn't buy any of that. Okay? But he's the priest running the church. So he didn't agree with the Vatican. He didn't want anybody to come up there with cups up front. With cup. I don't want that here. And so he's in trouble again with his boss. But if you think of that, I thought we were trying to not talk about that today.
Right. Well,
and they're getting this every Sunday.
When it comes to the Nordics, do you know where they lean spiritually? Was there any type of communication about what their spiritual beliefs were, what their when it comes to where we are spirit-wise, where they are spirit-wise, and how we can get to where they are?
All three of them approached it in the same manner at Douglas, okay? Love.
Yeah.
Number one, okay? We got to love. Get out from under this antagonistic attitude you've got. Back off. We love you. You gotta love us.
We gotta love ourselves.
Wait a minute. We're your cousins. Okay?
Cosmic cousins.
Now, in front of other people, they're not Nordics. That's a joke. Everybody knows that. It's a big joke all over engineering.
Right.
But when you're talking to them, with them, They love you, okay? And whatever it takes. This is a beautiful place out here. Let's make it this way.
Yeah, they're like Red Cross workers, and we're in a third world country.
Yes, right. And to me, the words are coming out of them with an unbelievable humor. Okay? Yes, sometimes it's really sexy, but I'm saying this is a constant humorous atmosphere for us to be in here in engineering. Okay? Nobody's fighting with anybody in that organization. We love each other. We love what's going on. We love being here with you. Wow. And then make it a joke.
A question popped into my head. Do you feel even today that do you have those experiences where you have information in your head? Do you feel like you're being guided?
Yeah, I get it like every week. I get another one again. Okay. And it corrects one of the others.
Has it picked up any, or is it just stayed consistent?
No, it's been up and down. But I have to say they're pushing.
Big time.
And like my being able to do what we're doing here, 93, 94 May, okay? That's sort of different too. I mean, if I go by the numbers, And so what's that all about? Okay, it's because somebody wants something implemented, and so they keep feeding you this stuff, and you then run with this ball, and you stick around longer. And this other thing of extended life is real. Mm-hmm. This is not a made-up story. This is real. Everybody in this room, in this house, okay, is going to live a whole lot longer. And they're going to live without anything physically wrong with them. That's not a joke. This is real. Yeah, it's going to be a different life. Too many of us. But like Mary and I, we're going to get on that 20-kilometer-long spacecraft flagship and cruise the galaxy. We're going to have a ball.
We just have to get to walk through that doorway. We need to get the information released.
Yeah.
And I was basically told that if we're going to wait for the government to release it, we'll wait forever.
Well, that's what you're doing.
That's right.
Yeah.
So we are, have you heard of the 100th monkey effect?
Yeah.
So we're trying to bump that up to the 1,000,000th monkey effect.
Yeah.
Where all of a sudden people just start knowing this information without understanding how they know it.
Yes.
It's seeping in through the mass consciousness to them. And if we're able to achieve that with just a small percentage of humanity, it can act like a rudder to guide, the rest.
Yeah, you're right.
So it's a very important, task to get this information out in a way that will, can be disseminated to as many countries, as many age groups as possible.
It's just like that document we had laying in there. That's so full of stuff, okay? It is unbelievable. And holy cats, those guys did this, and they went out there, and they're mining now, making money with other stars, planets, people. Wow.
Yeah, it's a huge part of
that's
system.
Cool.
Yeah. Why can't we be a part of it?
Yeah, let's go do the same thing. There were at least 3 groups which the Navy had gone into before the German Navy had gone into before the published investigation, okay? And
the 38, 39 visit to the poles by the Germans, is that what you're talking about?
Yeah.
There was one before that.
Yeah, I'm saying there were at least 3, possibly 4, that they had gone in there in the search type of an organization. And so a great deal of area investigation and knowledge was given to him before the published version came out. The level of diversification of areas that were found in some way supported what they thought they were going to find, and in other ways it was totally different, and they had great many questions which were not answered. And these were also geological questions, because the depth of the different ice fields were completely different than what they thought they were going to be. There was a rotation problem that was essentially giving them incorrect, what you would call navigation, okay? And this was like varied, it wasn't stable. And there was actually many of the normal questions from a geologic standpoint, which turned out to be brought forward because it was different than what they had planned on. So you're talking about a structural thing there, and then you're into the various caverns, and of course they located one large entrance which was below the surface of the ocean, and this then became an ideal vehicle for bringing the submarines in and out. That was discovered fairly early, and then later on, when they got down there, they found 3 others. When they got into, and I can't remember the name of it, but there were numerous lakes, and one of these lakes turned out to be, I think, like 64 degrees, and the areas around it were not really hot, but they were like warm weather type of areas. And this again was a major shock to the analysis of what they thought they were going to find. And so if you look at the overall, it was a really advanced learning curve that they went through, because they had all these numbers that they thought we were going to find, which were incorrect. Okay, then they found one of the second or third tunnels, which went like several miles, and then one of them split into 3 separate tunnels. 2 of those, they couldn't find the end of the tunnel. The third one opened into another cavern from the first cavern that they got from the big tunnel when they first went there. And so this is a geological study with not necessarily a military mission kind of thing. Obviously, they were shocked at what they found, okay? This was totally unreal, nothing to justify what they run into. So their astrophysicists and geophysicists, they did have astrophysicists back then. Germany did, okay? Both of these groups then went into immediate program studies of, again, the rotation of the planet, the poles themselves, north and south poles, and a great deal of questions were brought in, substantiating the military mission. But I guess from what most of the operatives brought back as far as information was like a shock condition of what they thought that they were going to be involved in. Now, you probably know that more than I do, but there was numerous areas where questions had to be answered, environmental, all kinds. And then to locate something this environment down there, it was a shock to the operatives. They weren't the ones that were down there. Other Navy other German Navy people were down there, not the operatives. The operatives are just talking to these people. So you're getting secondhand information. And yes, that's the reason some of it was incorrect. And then there was different titles for things. Not just that it was German, but there would be other titles and then even areas and regions. Some of them call one subject and somebody else would call that same area something else. A lot of confusion. And so to try to cut that down, the operative is trying to convince the admiral, Rick Abada, that this is what's going on. And this then is strange to the admiral. It's strange to one of the two captains that's sitting there. And the girl that's trying to type it, this is blue sky. And it's blue to me, okay? We're in disbelief of what the operative is trying to explain to us. And I think that that probably was the most important thing. The fact that this was not what we learned in the school. In no way. Now then, immediately, the admiral would ask, okay, what is your recommendation? You're the operative. What are you saying? What do you feel this is? How do you feel? How do you? What's your take on this? That type of questioning, and you would give specific questions, fire them right back at these kids, okay? And there would be a discussion about specific areas that the operatives brought up that they had information on. They had some photographs. They had some German-written documents, which then had to be interpreted because we didn't know how to read German. And so then the operative would explain that part to the admiral. And to me, it was 4 years almost of this continuous thing with more information about Antarctica, because it was still just the South Pole to us. The word Antarctica was hardly, even though it was known, was hardly ever even used.
There were a number of groups, the reptilians. If you're looking, depending on how you're looking at Antarctica, up in the northwest area, there are huge caverns that they inhabit. And in the southeast area where New Schwabenland is, and going up through up to where the rift system is, are smaller caverns and also ancient ruins that they directed us to and said this would be a good place for you to access because you're still using a lot of submarines. It had submarine access. So we were given the information that there was a habitable area that, or not we, the Germans, that could be used to build a base.
But the point was there were already extraterrestrial people there, okay? And that what Corey's saying is that, well, the operatives were not, they didn't go down there. So they're taking information from other people, and much of it was incorrect. But there were the facilities that were there, so somebody had been there, and that was all accepted. But I guess I wasn't familiar with the Nordics being here, the reptilians being there, and that. I didn't get that part. There were two separate programs going. One she had and one the SS had, okay? When the Third Reich SS found out about what she was doing with all these girls, okay, they confiscated everything they had, including the girls, okay? And they just almost put them in prison like workers in prison. That lasted several months. Then somebody said, wait a minute, if we let them go do it, that's another, they're getting information from different extraterrestrials than what we're getting from the reptilians. So that we got two ways to do this. So all of that stuff was given back to her and to all the people, which ended up in my book being 144 whatever people working on that thing. Okay? This was crazy, the way it ended up. My understanding is that the U.S. Navy found out about this, and that's what we did, okay? Our first spaceships are U.S. Navy attack class submarines. The Germans were doing the same thing, but actually, I don't know how much of the information got back, but the Germans were doing it after the United States did it.
What do you know of Marisa Orsic and her involvement with the Antarctica Nazi program?
Well, that's a big thing.
That's a big thing.
Yeah, that's a big thing. She knew all about it. Okay, she was one of the first that went down with the regular facilities, and she took a lot of the girls and guys with her down there. But they still had stuff in Germany. And when she went out on into the galaxy, they left from Antarctica. They didn't leave from Germany. The production program to bring everything from underground facilities in factories in Germany to Antarctica was already being invented even before the war started. Crazy.
You have said that the Nazis relocated 7 million people to Antarctica, including slave labor. Did the Navy learn about who was being taken as slaves?
I guess I have to answer that with some political that could be advantageous to research, okay, and then just plain the slaves that are doing the manufacturing of all of these equipments for all these different extraterrestrial vehicles, the factory people, because they brought all these factory people down there, took them out of the underground facilities, took all of the drill motors, the machinery, everything went down.
The Navy was aware of that, was aware of the amount of slaves that were going down there?
Yes.
Did the Navy spies ever talk about the Nazis developing directed energy weapons?
Yes, definitely.
When was the first testing and use of these weapons, and were they used against Operation High Jump aircrafts or ships?
They were tested in operation way before that, and yes, they were involved in that.
Can you elaborate on when they were tested and how?
Well, they were tested in facilities there, and it's all of the. You had engineers, you had designers, you had personnel people, you had transportation people, you had factory people. I mean, just like great, big, enormous production companies that build airplanes. You had all this there. It's not really went around. They were in operation with some of these underground facilities that had been in Germany, operating before World War II even started. Not all that they got, but what I'm trying to say is, not that they were planning on losing the war, this became a better operational area. Unbelievable.
Did Antarctica-based Nazi spacecraft fly over the U.S. in the summer of 1952?
Yes.
So they left from Antarctica, and the flyover were for ships that left from Antarctica.
When Eisenhower had that big rain dance, okay, Truman had the one before that, all right? Both events took place on Air Force facilities, okay, out on the desert. The Eisenhower one, Eisenhower actually, he was in Palm Springs, and he supposedly had something wrong with his teeth, and they had to go get his teeth fixed, okay? So he went from there out to the air base, the Air Force, okay? There were 5 vehicles. These had all come from Antarctica. They didn't come from out in the galaxy, which everybody's been taught, okay? And they had the 2 great big ones. The extraterrestrial officers were in dress white uniforms, and 2 of them remained hovering, and the one smaller one and the 2 big ones landed. The crews got out right there, and everybody could see them. So it's not that this didn't take place. That's actually what influenced him to, sign off on the whole thing, and I can't do anything anymore. Wow. Paperclip. Okay, we get a few of them in paperclip. We get thousands more, not just this few guys that started with the paper, Von Braun, Debus, and those guys. Every single aerospace, every single advanced medical research in this country, these people went into. These people went into Lockheed, Douglas, Caltech, JPL, you name it. They went into Navy research facilities. They infiltrated into everything here technically. It's a massive program.
Yeah, the the Nordics and the reptilians were in contact with the Germans, and the German group that had reached out, like the Vril Society, they were more in contact with the Nordics and this group that are allies with the Nordics, and they got in contact with them by going into like Tibet and all these places and getting all these ancient scrolls that had like schematics on how to make ships. And they were going in and talking like, they're not, I guess, like monks, but in that area, they were torturing these monks and getting all these deep secrets out of them about these ancient teachings. And they found one group that was guarding an opening to the entrance for a deep inner earth type area, that it was a Nordic base and that had been there for many thousands of years. Okay. Yeah, one of the this blue avian being that introduced itself to me.
I think they're cool people, but go ahead.
Oh yeah. They first of all, I tried to get out of working with them. They wanted me to speak on their behalf. I said, well, I've got a real weak voice. I'm an introvert. I don't like being in front of people very much.
Yeah.
It didn't matter. And then I tried to tell them, no one's going to believe me. And of course, they told me, whether people believe you or not is of no consequence. As long as you plant this information as a seed into their consciousness, your job is done. If they think I'm insane, whatever they think, it's of no consequence.
Yeah.
And they stated that the message, which their group had brought to Earth on 3 other occasions, and the message had been co-opted by these control groups to then be used to control people.
Yeah.
And they said, we don't need a new religion. All of our religions have the basic tenets of do unto others, we're all one, and unconditional love, and forgiveness of yourself and of others. All that ideology is already out in all of these religions.
Yeah.
We just have to change this. Everyone is looking to the sky or looking outside of themselves for help, for someone to come and save them. And what these beings are saying is, get off your knees, quit looking to the skies for a savior, and look inside yourself. Because when we've been a part of the problem, we're going to have to be a part of the solution. So that's basically the mission that they've started me off on. And it's evolved to a point to where we are now trying to find reverse propaganda to help the masses wake up.
Okay. Implement it.
Right.
Yeah.
Hi there, everybody. Welcome back. I hope you enjoyed that video footage of William Tompkins and Corey meeting for the very first time. And now I'm going to conduct an interview with Corey Goode. I've got a few questions for him. And then after my questions, I'll turn it over to you guys where you can ask your questions on the live chat and we'll talk about them. So how's it going, Corey?
Pretty good. Yeah, I'm pretty exhausted.
Yeah.
We just shot about 11 episodes of Cosmic Disclosure over the last 2.5 days. I shot it with Emery Smith and David Wilcock, and I'm exhausted. So,
And you're exhausted.
Yeah.
Now you're here doing this webinar.
I am. So if I'm a little slow today,
It's okay. It's been a busy week for the both of us.
But those episodes will come out soon. Go to blueavians.com if you are not a member of Gaia and take a look.
Yeah, and those episodes he shot with Emery are going to be awesome.
Epic, even.
Epic, yes. Very deep, very good. So my first question for you, what was it like watching that interview or that talk that you did with William Tompkins for the first time? Because you haven't seen that before, right?
No, I haven't.
Yeah.
I have not seen the footage. It was pretty cool. Now looking back, I would have other questions that I would ask him. But it was our first real meeting to sit and talk. And I remember he was, I think we said before, he was giddy, like a school kid, someone that he could actually talk to about these things on the same level. And the conversation flowed very well.
Yeah, that was an awesome. I haven't seen that interview before either, and that was a good one. You guys got into some things that, that's a big thing when you have two people that are both familiar with programs or have been in them. When they're talking to each other, it's like they can draw things out of each other that normally you couldn't get. So that's why your episodes that you just shot with Emery are going to be so cool.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, when we were prepping for shooting those, you were doing a little work or trying to around the conference table.
Yeah.
And Emery and I started having conversations, and the things that came out were pretty amazing.
Totally, yeah. I was here for the what would you call that? The pre-game or
we're briefing, making actual outlines, which was great for the show, and they turned out really good. A lot of information came out.
I was here trying to get some work done, and once Emery and Corey were starting going back and forth together, I couldn't work anymore. I had to listen to the conversation because it was so riveting. So I'm super excited for those episodes. And I want to discuss now a little bit more about William Tompkins. One of the things that he was very passionate about was people understanding that everything we're taught in schools, I won't say everything, 99% of what we're taught in schools,
just the important stuff,
exactly, is false. So let's talk about that a little bit. What is it going to be like kind of post-disclosure, or we're kind of getting into disclosure now in a way. What's it going to be like, do you think?
Well, I guess for the average person, not too many of them have gone and learned the improper models for physics, that they're going to have to unlearn and relearn like the academics have. But it's going to be more of belief system shattering that's going to occur. Now, with the academics, they're going to have an extremely hard time because everything that they had worked so hard to attain, all of the information that they had programmed and spent hours and hours memorizing, it's going to be useless because, they're going to find out that, there's a different unified mathematics that it's a hyperdimensional mathematics, and they're going to find out what a lot of us already know about, the electric universe model, and they're going to be able to apply electrical engineering type models to the universe, and a lot of things are going to start happening quickly. But it'll be a true renaissance. People will be very excited. They'll be frustrated in the beginning and upset, but they'll see the opportunity to learn and reach out into the galaxy.
Totally. Yeah, it seems like physics, history, you can kind of pick the subjects that are going to be the most hit by that. So let's talk a little bit about the competing programs, the competing secret space programs. I discussed a little bit in my PowerPoint. You guys discussed it a little bit in that interview we just watched, and I want to hear more from you. So in the William Tompkins states in the 1980s is when the Naval Solar Warden program really became operational. Yeah. So what were there any programs being built and made before that in the 60s or 70s?
A lot of what was going on in mainly the 50s and 60s was the R&D and developing out of this technology into many different forms. And they had some small programs that were, going out and gathering intel that would be needed for building a larger program. So the Nazis obviously had a pretty advanced program, back in the 30s and 40s. So ours did not really develop in earnest until Solar Warden, when we were able to go out en masse and be very consistent with our presence in space. Before that, it was more like a small little program that would send out craft here and there to go to a different region of space to gather just information, whether it be about ETs or just about the energetics of that region.
Gotcha. So when the naval programs became operational in the 80s, did that instantly overtake the advancements of the Air Force programs, or was there?
No, those were developing in parallel. And interestingly enough, the military-industrial complex, Northrop Grumman and all of those, they were building out on kind of a linear program, kind of like the map for the future that William Tompkins showed us on this large, it was like a 2 by maybe 4 foot engineering pad.
Is that the integrated space plan by Rockwell? Yeah.
Yes. So that was more of the path that they took, and they were not. This was what became the military MIC SSP, and they were kept in the dark of the progress of the Navy program. The Navy program was interstellar in nature and fully protecting our solar system. And the Air Force was more of, they had a couple bases here and there, but they were more focused on protecting the United States from other countries.
Gotcha. So when the naval program did become operational, it was more advanced than the MIC SSP. Gotcha.
Absolutely, from the beginning.
Gotcha.
And then the people that owned the MIC SSP, that owned all of these corporations, were also secretly developing within these same companies and compartmentalized areas more advanced technology. So these guys in one lab, we're building all this awesome technology for the Air Force and the DIA. It's up there. It's keeping us safe. We're on the cutting edge. Well, they don't know maybe the next building over, they're building more advanced things, the kind of things that we are selling to extraterrestrials.
Crazy. And that kind of leads me into a couple questions. First, how was it that the naval programs were more advanced almost instantly than the MICs?
Well, they were receiving different information.
Gotcha.
They were getting intel from the Nazis, who had developed their program further than where the MIC program would have been. They were a little bit more advanced, and we received a lot of the technologies from the Nazi program, as well as some Nordics that helped us out.
Right.
The ones who worked with Tompkins.
Tompkins was getting assistance from the Nordics.
Yeah,
so.
they helped us fine tune it, and they helped us. One of the things I heard that they helped us with was to identify Nazi spy rings that were sabotaging the American program.
Right, because the naval program didn't become operational to the 80s. And so that was a couple decades there of interim where it's like the Navy was trying to get it going, but they kept getting sabotaged.
Well, the Navy wasn't being sabotaged as much as the Air Force was and Apollo.
Gotcha.
But the Navy, they had to build out an infrastructure to build ships, a shipbuilding area, like in Utah, for example. And then they had to bring in all of these people that were submarine builders. And then the engineers developed the idea for like the cigar-shaped craft, like the one I was assigned to, and then these guys would build it. And it would take quite a while to build them. And I was told that the engineers that helped support it when we were up in space, the engineering group, at some point when they were building the craft, they came and lived on the craft as they were building out the rest of it. So they would be completely intimate with all the ins and outs of the systems.
Because these were massive craft, up to
They
a
were.
kilometer. How large do you know was the size of the craft that you served on?
The one I was on was, it was one of the smaller craft. It would have been, about the size of 3/4 the size of an aircraft carrier.
Gotcha. So this is
right. And some of these cylindrical craft were a kilometer, 2 kilometers long. They could just keep building out. They're modular, so you can just keep building out. And they'd build it in they would be very long, skinny, basically tubes. And these could also connect with each other.
right. So, and this was all done underground. So they must have had huge underground caverns. Where
They would fly them out in sections.
So they would build them underground in sections and fly them out into space.
Right, and sometimes the final assembly of different areas would be in some of these kind of space docks that would, help pull the middle section of the ship away so they could slide out the internal modules. It could be changed out to be a hospital ship, a troop transport, a scientific research, ship by what was swapped out.
And then would they have to get these modular components out into space, would they have to dematerialize it with certain technologies and then rematerialize it? Or was it just, was there a kind of opening into the base that they would physically?
No, there was a large opening that they build the different stages in, and then different stages will have different types of engines. They don't have the torsion drive engines, but they have kind of like impulse type engines, gravitational, the kind of like they have on the flying saucers, down in the little pods, the 3 pods. They're little devices that focus gravitational energy, almost like a tractor beam.
Okay, like a reverse tractor beam.
Yeah, they can push and pull. You know, and they have those that they use, and they'll come out of the cavern, and then just almost like they're on an elevator, they'll use those components and go up into space.
Right up into space.
Yeah, and then they'll be finally.
So if anybody might have been sitting there in the 80s in Utah and seen this thing fly up into space, and they might have thought it was an alien, but it was a modular component being taken up there or something like that.
Almost everything that we see that we think are aliens are us.
Us, yeah. Almost. Not everything. Almost. So on that note, we were discussing the compartmentalization in these programs. I mean, we could have the same corporation be building components for not only the Navy but the MIC SSPs, and then just the compartmentalization of it. It's so difficult with Tompkins, for instance, stated that 75% of Douglas's contracts were for the Navy, but 75% were for 25% were for the Air Force.
Yeah.
So it's difficult to. That's why it's so difficult to label. We can't label one corporation works for these guys or something like that or whatnot. So let's see. Let's talk about those competing programs now. So discuss a little bit about the Secret Space Program Alliance and kind of the hierarchy of these factions of people working to end the Cabal rule.
The Secret Space Program Alliance, that pretty much started within Solar Warden, and it was beginning to occur around 85 or 86 at least, because that's when I ran into my first alliance members, but I didn't know what was going on at that time. I didn't know about the slave trade, and it was through a couple of operatives who I was told got killed in this operation that talked me into breaking into an area and looking in these pods, cryogenic pods, and we found bodies. And we were overtaken by the gas from the cryo chamber. I guess we didn't open it properly. And I passed out, and supposedly they died. But those were the first two people starting to gather info, that I ran into, that were gathering info for the Alliance.
Gotcha. Were you reprimanded for doing that? You passed out?
Yeah, I was reprimanded, then read in, and then forced to take part in some of the slave trade stuff.
Gotcha.
But most of the SSP Alliance leadership are made up of all of the different space programs, people that have broken away. But initially, most of them were Navy.
Interesting. How many people would you say serve in Solar Warden then and now?
I'm trying to get the current project name.
Gotcha. Because now that Solar Warden's even been named in mainstream media articles, I'm sure
there've been a couple of project names.
Yeah.
But I'm sorry, what was your question?
Just speculation. How many people served in it? Maybe at the beginning and possibly now. Would you say?
I mean, many thousands.
Thousands. Gotcha.
Thousands. Yeah.
And this is just in the Navy programs.
And for the most part, the people that are serving in these 20 and back programs, about 98% of them are military. They pull people out of the Marines, out of the Air Force, out of the Coast Guard even, and pull them into these programs, and then regress them back as they did me. So very seldom do they use civilian assets in this stuff.
Gotcha. A few more questions I kind of had jumping around. So when we have these competing secret space programs, how is it such that, say, the craft can be operating in space and yet it goes undetected or something to that effect by the other programs, or how is the secrecy maintained outside of our atmosphere?
Well, not only are there very strict flight corridors,
Gotcha.
Let's say we have the Earth and we have the MIC space station. It's orbiting. Okay, so we have the LOC on the moon, and also a couple of locations in the United States and I think Europe, where they're tracking everything. Not only that, they're tracking every satellite, every ship from every program, or if an ET ship comes in, they know exactly where it is. And everything, it's like this huge choreographed, it's almost beautiful. They know, like if someone's going to task a satellite in Hawaii, they know that if they have a ship or a space station that's visible from their angle, when they task it, they know that they need to move that asset.
Gotcha.
So they have it all choreographed. Now, when it comes to people in the space program, it is usually when they're on this side of the planet, things are happening on this side of the planet. And if they happen to catch a glimpse of something extremely advanced compared to what they're flying, they're told, don't talk about it. This is a concept craft. You'll probably be flying one in 5 or 10 years.
Gotcha.
And then they don't say anything.
So you have like you mentioned, the flight corridor, so you know where everything it is at all times. So, okay, now it's time to go, and you'll go out when you're able to.
It's all choreographed.
All choreographed, gotcha. And then let's talk a little bit more about the SSP Alliance. So you said we have the SSP Alliance. It's made up from primarily the Navy programs, and but then we also have the Earth Alliance. So talk a little bit more about those two, maybe if they're working together or if they don't know about each other or something to that effect.
Yeah, some of them know about each other, not all.
Gotcha.
The Earth Alliance is kind of a mess. It's made up of so many different cells and factions that it's hard to keep track of, but it makes it hard to defeat as well.
Right.
I think there are like 160 plus countries that have joined this alliance against the Cabal. And within each of those countries, though, they're fighting the Cabal themselves to some degree. But this Earth Alliance is pretty much a group that has gotten together. I mean, elements of China, elements of Russia, South America, Brazil, I think, was a part of it. The BRICS group that broke away. So that is what the Earth Alliance is.
Gotcha.
And they're working very closely with elements in the U.S. military to defeat this deep state part, our part of the fight against the cabal.
Right. And I would imagine the people in the SSP Alliance, with their information accessibilities, probably know most, not all, but most of, say, the Earth Alliance, or maybe not most, but what about the opposite way? What about the Earth Alliance and the SSP Alliance? Going up, would they know about the SSP Alliance?
Some of them do.
Some of them.
Some of them do, not a lot,
Gotcha.
but a lot of the higher echelon group do.
And can we expect them to be working more in tandem in the future?
I don't know. I know that the SSP Alliance is wanting a full disclosure event.
Right.
The Earth Alliance has pretty much made a bunch of deals with the cabal that, all right, we won't reveal certain information on you if you don't reveal it on us, and then we'll slowly reveal all of the information about suppressed technologies and ETs and all, and suppressed history as well.
Interesting. So, and I mean, full disclosure, say, to this group that doesn't know the full picture could be different than a full disclosure to this group.
Well, full disclosure scares the hell out of people in the Alliance and the cabal, because so many things have been done in the battle that are crimes against humanity by both sides. And most of the Alliance are people that broke away from the cabal. So they used to do very bad things. They had a change of heart and, put their skin in the game for the other side.
Gotcha. So that's why this is such a complex
Very complex.
thing that's going on. And lastly, last question, and then we'll get to some of the viewer Q&A. Are you going to be working with any new whistleblowers coming forward? For instance, Emory. I mean, talk about
Yeah, we're
what you
talking.
guys are doing.
Yeah, we've got a few ideas about some things going on. We're talking about doing a kind of a book on ET species together. Talking about doing a lot of possible events and webinars.
Awesome.
David, he and I possibly. Nothing's been agreed on, but there's a lot of talk. We're all going to be living pretty close to each other, and it'll make it pretty easy to do a lot of fun things. So.
Yeah.
Emory is definitely an interesting person. His partner Olivia is an interesting person as well. Got some great information. There are other people that we are hoping that we can begin to bring in and talk to. What has happened is that when the Tom DeLonge thing occurred, the Earth Alliance and the MIC-SSP, which is the Air Force basically, they decided that they did not want to do any of their disclosure through the UFO community. So they have been focusing on doing their own initiative completely separate from ufology. And we're hoping that we can get Tom DeLonge's group to work closer with ufology in the future, but I think there's been so many infiltrations, there's been so much that's occurred that they're wanting to try to legitimize it somehow completely separate from ufology.
Right.
So it's going to make it harder and harder to get whistleblowers because a lot of them have been told, no, go through this initiative.
Gotcha. But I suppose once you get your grassroots stuff going on, do more webinars, things like that, more good content with, say, Emory, it's going to make a lot of people want to come forward and say, hey, I can
That's what we're hoping.
feel safe talking to these guys, get what I want to out there.
Yeah, that's what we're hoping. And I mean, people that want to come forward, they do have to be very careful. You want to, you saw what happened to me.
Yeah, totally.
I went to an unethical person and I got outed. You want to be very careful who you go to start sharing this information, because a lot of times there's incriminating information for us in the bulk of the information we're releasing, and we have to be careful because people are going to be pretty crazed when all this stuff comes out, and they're going to be looking for anyone who is ever involved to hang from a lamppost.
Totally. So on that note, I suppose that we'll get into some of the viewer questions. So I'm going to scroll through here and we'll go question by question. So here we go. How can we get the Vatican to open the underground library or basically whatever they have to the public? Be a toughie.
Yeah.
Be a real toughie.
Basically, we would have to have disclosure first.
Yeah.
And then maybe 20 years later, they would pop it open.
Right.
We recorded, I think, 2 episodes of Cosmic Disclosure with Emery, where he talks about he had 3 visits to the Vatican, and there was a 20-acre vault where they had all types of ancient, like human, I guess, technology and relics, as well as non-terrestrial relics.
Interesting.
And he describes them in pretty good detail. He states that he still has a contact there, and he wants to try to get back in. So we'll see.
And I mean, if we get enough whistleblowers to come forward, it wouldn't even matter. We would already know what's in the Vatican, so they wouldn't have to tell us. Let's see here. Here's a good question. It says, is it likely that the, quote, Nordics that helped Tompkins were actually from one of the Anshar groups, inner Earth, rather than being extraterrestrial in origin?
That is my suspicion. That is my suspicion. But there are Nordic groups from other star systems. But these inner Earth groups, which are basically us from the future, seem to be, obviously for a good reason, most invested in building the United States, helping us build and create an ability to help them combat the Draco agenda.
Right.
And what's crazy is this isn't only like a space war for territory. This is a time war. This is something they're going back and forth in time. These beings, they have the ability to travel through space to a point to where they're traveling through time. They're time travelers. They can travel through time just as easily as space.
Space and time are the same thing.
Right. So they can shoot back into time 50 years, do something, shoot back. It does not matter to them. And that's so hard for people to wrap their minds around. But this battle between the Draco and a few other groups, but one that these Nordic groups are vested in, is a time war.
Yeah, and that being said, the term Nordic is a very umbrella term, and it could mean, basically just means Scandinavian-looking extraterrestrials. So that could be Anshar from the inner Earth, or various Pleiadian groups, or whatever the case is.
There was well over a dozen different types of them.
So it's good to note there too. You mentioned the possible book detailing ET species. That would be very good to get our specifics straight. Because
who better to do it with than someone who has done over 3,000 specimen autopsies?
Right. Yeah, totally. And also, like you've said, some reptilian species are not as nefarious as others. It's very complex. Here's an interesting question you may or may not be able to answer. Corey, you've talked about plates in the floor that maintain a 1G field. Can you explain anything about how these operate?
I don't know exactly how they operate, but they are kind of like waffle-looking plates that dovetail, lock into each other in corridors. They're about 4 inches thick, I guess. And there's an electrical current runs through them, and it's all hooked into the temporal drive, the field that it creates, and it creates 1G downward motion. But there can be times when they don't work right, and they come and they replace them. They'll turn off entire sections and replace these grids. You will walk along, and if a partial grid isn't working, you usually can tell because they make a buzzing noise. But if you don't notice it, you can go, and then your leg will just keep on going up as you're walking.
You're just walking, you start floating up.
No, just like your leg. It'll be just like a part of the grid.
So maybe instead of a 1G field, it's repelling gravity or something like that? Flips you up?
Yeah, or it's no gravity. Yeah.
Interesting.
For just that one spot, because the only gravity you have is whatever per square inch is being given to you through those plates.
that's, we talked about physics earlier, and that us having to relearn all of that. That's what I'm most excited to relearn, is the actual true physics as to what's going on here, not the.
But sometimes when the sections are shut down, the gravity is shut down. People go through just like they would in a space station. They have monkey bars up on the ceiling, where you can
just fly through.
Yeah.
Here's a question. How do higher dimensional beings view humans having pets? I mean, as you're kind of taking care of them in a way.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to say that's kind of like what we are to them, because that really ticks people off. A lot of times when these beings come here, Americans usually are so arrogant when they travel to Mexico or somewhere else. They kind of look down on the people and, they're just not as sophisticated. They're just not as sophisticated as Well, that's how some of them are with us. They see us as, us in the United States. We're dangerous, we're unpredictable, we're
kind of are,
nutty, yeah. So, I don't know. I'm sure there's a quote in the Law of One or something about pets, but I really don't know how they see us.
I mean, as long as you're
pets.
it's kind of the pet's choice to be there. You walk in and they come up and lick you. So.
Yeah. Tyr had the perfect opportunity to tell me whether he liked dogs or not when he popped into my house that time when I was sitting on the couch with my dog. And scared the crap out of my dog.
Let's see. David and Emery were talking about a sarcophagus that opened by harmonics and telepathic interface. How many things around are like that at ancient times?
Quite a lot. A lot of the technology you wouldn't think was technology. It just looks like stone.
Yeah.
And there is a conscious interface with it, or there is a second component that is needed to energetically activate them.
Gotcha.
And you would never know they were technology.
Right. Yeah. When people say Atlantis was so advanced or prehistory civilizations, their advancements were on a totally different scale.
Yeah, we were trading away a lot of that kind of stuff to ETs. We were like, why do they want this crap, And finally we figured out that it was technology that we're handing away, not just
rocks. It's pretty funny. Here's a rock. Oh, wait, what? I want that back. Do you meet many people from Earth in the SSP that you would consider spiritual, or are they mostly rough military types?
Mostly gruff military types.
Yeah.
Now, I was fortunate enough to spend most of my time with the researchers, with the engineers and the eggheads or scientists. Yeah. So they, a lot of times, I wouldn't call them spiritual, but they were extremely open-minded and would talk about spiritual things more. Mm-hmm. But that kind of stuff wouldn't happen around the military types, really.
Gotcha. Here's a good question. It says, my grandchildren get into arguments about mythology with their teachers. How do you, I assume you and Corey, talk to your kids about real history and how to navigate schooling?
Yeah, before we moved up here to Colorado, my son was in, I think, a Lutheran school. And my son came home and he said, Dad, the teacher was telling me there's no aliens. And I was like, yes, there is. He was like, yes, there are aliens. And he was like baffled why this person he trusted to tell him the truth about things was telling him something contrary to what he had heard at home. So there is a balance, of what I talk about around my kids. You got to remember they're developing at a different level, and pace than we are. So I don't want to, there's some things I just share with them as my daughter's 14 and she's pretty advanced. So there's more I can share with her. Mm-hmm. But, I had to be careful.
Gotcha. Yeah, it's pretty difficult, not to shatter their belief systems, but to say, hey, this teacher doesn't, unfortunately, she's just unaware.
Mm-hmm. And I want them to form their own. I don't want to guide and form their belief systems for them. I want them, give them good foundations, but I want them to form their own ideas.
Yeah, and it's a very difficult balance in, we kind of being the parents, but also letting them grow on their own. So hopefully we won't have to do that too much longer. Mm-hmm. What is your take on the release of the memo yesterday?
Well, my take is this. People have been talking about mass arrest for a long time. And it's been premature because the deep state has controlled the FBI, the DOJ, and parts of the DOD even, because, you know, they put in a bunch of bureaucrats to run it. So the release of the memo is one step towards exposing the people that will do the arresting, because right now they would have to arrest themselves, and that's not going to happen, as we're seeing. And it's people from both sides of the aisle. All the people wanting to say, no, I can't listen to this because Trump is at the head of this fight, and I hate Trump. Forget about Trump. This is the bigger fight against the cabal, the deep state, and people from both parties are taking part in the deep state, and people from both parties are taking part in the alliance as well.
Gotcha.
So what we're seeing with the memo is probably about 10% of the tip of the sword that's about to be thrust into the public.
Cool. So it's, the first in many document dubs that have kind of been heard.
Yeah, I mean, I've been hearing all about the judges, FISA judges said no again, even after they brought this dossier in, and apparently Obama gave him an order to do the warrant anyway.
Interesting.
So some stuff, there's going to be some uncomfortable things that are going to come popping out, the 90% of the unseen tip of the sword, you know.
Right.
There were people actually conspired to kill Trump, and there's evidence of it. So, I mean, it's going to go along, it's going to, a lot of treason stuff.
And it's already been reported in the mainstream that there's a second memo underway against the Department of Justice, I believe.
And also the
State Department, State Department.
And the IG, even though it will finish its primary investigation soon, I'm told that their information won't be released to the public due to some policy until like 2020 or something. But but if Trey Gowdy or someone else headed a special counsel or an investigation through the FBI, they would be able to have access to the info, just not the American people.
Gotcha. So let's see here. A couple more questions and we'll wrap this up. Let's see. Here's an interesting question. Have you seen one of the latest X-Files episodes that discuss the Mandela effect? Yeah, I haven't either. But
the new ones have come out?
I do know in one of the new X-Files they also reference the secret space program too. So there's a lot of truth being kind of put out in the open by the X-Files there. And that's something you were talking to with Tompkins about in the video we just presented, was how Hollywood, I mean, not only have they been putting bad stuff in plain sight for so long, but we can use that in the good propaganda war too.
We have to.
Yeah, we totally have to. Let's see, are you concerned at all about the shift since all of the inner Earth has entered into a temporal anomaly?
No. And apparently all of these beings do this. Even the reptilians during this time period, they put themselves into some sort of null zone, because they've already gone through these changes. This is like lower dimensional energy to some of them, you know. So it's not beneficial to them,
Totally.
like it is to us, because I mean we're lower down on the scale. This energy is going to, you know, help lift us up some, but for them, they've already been through a process like that.
Gotcha. And then last question here, what further advice or suggestions do you have for us as individuals to help with the collective? So organite, food vibrations, meditation, anything else?
All of those things, but I think right now it's more important than ever. And you don't necessarily have to work, I mean, I'm not asking you to work on my projects, but do projects, anything, whatever your skill is, whatever your muse is, follow that and begin to contribute to the collective consciousness. And if we all start doing that in just little ways, it's going to cause a cascade.
Absolutely. I mean, a lot of people, when they hear what the mainstream media go on, and they just kind of roll their eyes and look away, but that's a huge opportunity for you to do something about it. You know, whether you start a YouTube channel or write something on Facebook, or hand out little cards, or, you know, when you're out in public and you hear something, don't just turn away. Maybe try to plant a seed, you know, and it's never underestimate the power of that. So there's all kinds of little things, like Corey mentioned, work on projects, you know, so it's kind of do or die now, you know.
It is. Yeah.
We're getting into a point where, like you always say, we either have the choice to go on that optimal timeline or not. So we pretty much need to do all we can right now. And that's about it. So thank you, everybody, for watching this second installment of the Disclosing the Secret Space Program webinar series. Hope you enjoyed my presentation. Hope you enjoyed the video between William Tompkins and Corey Goode of them meeting for the first time. And I hope you enjoyed this interview and the Q&A that we did with you guys. So thank you very much. Anything you'd like to say, Corey?
Nope, that's it.
All right. So have a good one, guys. Till next time.